Let us suppose there is a meaningful parallel to be made between mind, broadly considered, and soil. I don't mean dirt, I mean soil. Structured, living soil, the basis of all higher life on earth, the thing farmers and gardeners cultivate, and that forms naturally across the surface of the planet in certain fortunate places, and a miraculous thing in itself. The biologically active, porous medium that is developed in the uppermost layer of the Earth's crust and is the principal substrata of life on Earth. I want to compare this remarkable thing, soil, with the equally remarkable thing, mind, that non-corporeal phenomenon, the psyche, the soul, call it what you will. I have two sources for this parallel, one ancient and one modern. First, the ancient one, Plato. He compares the skull of the head to a stone fence around Ploughland. The brain is our ploughland, he says. Our mental world as soil. It's in his dialogue, the Timaeus. He doesn't extend or explore or unpack this idea, but it is profoundly suggestive all the same. I don't know if it's ever been pursued with any conviction. But I want to take it seriously, the mind as soil, as ploughland. The field of education is already replete with this metaphor, the word field itself. We sow seeds in young minds. We refer to ready minds as fertile ground. We cultivate students. Every year there is a new crop of students, and so on. In psychology too, similar metaphors. We bury memories, for example, as if the mind is soil. The classical source for the metaphor is Plato. And in Plato's cosmology, a metaphor is not merely a literary device as it might be for us. Rather, for us, this language is a residue, a relic of an understanding that has been lost and forgotten, part of a broader and deeper cosmology. So let us take the analogy seriously. Mind is like soil. Soil is like mind. Mind is to soil as soil is to mind. On this equation, we can extend the analogies in both directions. By taking it seriously, I mean proposing that it is among metaphors the best, the most adequate metaphor, the metaphor that works the best, all things considered. We are happy these days to make an analogy between soil and the processes and the flora of the intestines, the microbiome, the gut. We are less happy to see the brain as a type of intestines of the head, but it's not an unwarranted comparison. Again, the metaphor is not merely poetic, it has an adequacy in reality. So let us take it as a given on the authority of Plato and his ploughland analogy. Mind is to soil as soil is to mind. The second source is the modern one. We find this idea in the rambling lectures of the great modern gardener, Alan Chadwick, sometimes hailed as the greatest gardener of the modern era. A British aristocrat and a Shakespearean actor and an eccentric, he had the rare distinction of having had Rudolf Steiner as his personal tutor when he was a boy. He studied horticulture under the French master Louis Lorette. Late in his life in the USA, he created several extraordinary gardens and attracted a following of apprentices and students. Chadwick had learnt aristocratic European pre-industrial horticulture and was like a living link to a pre-20th century tradition of the soil. Among his practical notes, he offers an interesting cosmology. The soils today, he says, are compacted, just as our minds are compacted, the analogy he makes. We have puny, compacted minds, an exact mirror of our compacted soils. He explains this to his students as he demonstrates his digging technique. He means this in more than just a metaphor. It's an important parallel, the adequate metaphor. What should soil be like? It should be sponge-like, porous and layered, structured, stratified, breathing. Living soil is riddled with holes like a sponge and is rich in humus that, like a sponge, can hold water and nutrients in colloidal suspension. Plants in these soils are deep-rooted and grow to type. Poor soils have no structure, no air, no light, no strata. They dry to dust or turn into mud and don't hold nutrients. They are mineralized and dead. Plants in these soils are shallow-rooted and stunted and distorted. Chadwick's whole method of soil renovation involved trenching or double digging, a very old-fashioned technique. It restores strata. It also creates the phenomenon he calls bloom. He tells his students that the most important part of their duties is to cultivate the 6 inches below the surface of the soil and the 6 inches above. The 6 inches above is where the soil blooms. We've lost almost all understanding of this now. Bloom is that grey layer on grapes, an intermediate living layer of microbes and whatnot between the fruit and the air. We tend to wash it off, but all living things have bloom, as Chadwick calls it, a thin zone extending outward from their skin. Good soil has bloom. You can see it most easily in newly worked soil, where it sort of shines or shimmers in the light, or seems like a very thin veil of spider webs over the soil. It is where the soil is breathing, and a zone forms above the surface populated with airborne microbes that mirror the soil-borne microbes below the surface. The important thing is that it's an intermediate layer. It mediates between the soil and the atmosphere. But further, in reality, a living soil extends, breathes much further into the atmosphere. The air above living soil is different to that above dead soil. You can see it in the insect life that gathers in it. Chadwick talks a lot about the moist gases. You can smell living soil. So it extends, properly considered, into the air. The stratifications of living soil extend above the soil surface. Soil is all about pneuma, air, because soil, that sponge, is itself an intermediate layer between the mineral and the gaseous, between the rock and the sky. Good soil is finely stratified and is as much air as it is mineral. It is in soil that the atmosphere penetrates the earth, as it were, where they overlap. Chadwick's methods of cultivation are all about maximizing these levels of stratification, these intermediate zones. To return to our analogy, a healthy mind is like living soil and is stratified into many fine layers, fine gradations. But, Chadwick says, the structure of our minds has collapsed. Our minds are compacted. If we dig open living soil, the naked eye can distinguish perhaps a dozen or more gradations of colour, strata. If we dig open poor soil, we can see perhaps 3 or 4. Much of what Chadwick says echoes, in its own way, the profound studies of the French scholar Henri Corbin. In his analysis, too, modern man is subject to psychic compaction. There is, Corbin says, an intermediate world, an in-between realm that he calls the imaginal that we have lost. It has been flattened, crushed, compacted, under the weight of the historical mind. There is an entire ontological layer to which we have become insensitive. Chadwick, the master gardener, says the same, using soil as his demonstration. Where have all the elementals gone, the fairies and the gnomes and the sylphs and the undines and such creatures of folklore that populated enchanted gardens? That is the imaginal realm, the in-between realm, a strata of reality we have lost. Chadwick made magical gardens. He did it by restoring soil stratification and structure. Stratification delineates zones of the mind. There is the soil surface and the zone of bloom above the soil. There is the topsoil, the conscious mind. There is the subsoil, the subconscious mind, and deeper layers, the unconscious mind, and then bedrock, the deepest layers. How many layers are there? Most psychological models nominate 3 or 4. We all know of waking, dreaming and sleeping. There's 3. But in this soil structure model, there should be dozens. Instead, our mental field has compacted, hardened into several fixed zones. We have lost all the finer gradations, like the realm between waking and sleeping. I'm reminded of Milton Erickson, the great hypnotist. There are no fixed trance states, he decided. Rather, it is a sliding scale and we move in and out of various trance states all the time. Just spend 10 minutes talking to someone and watch as they move in and out of various levels of conscious and subconscious attention. But we are unaware of such a continuum and oblivious to just how far it extends. This is the diagnosis. Now let us consider Chadwick's remedy. How do we cultivate this ploughland? Our soils, even the best of them, have become so universally compacted, he says, that the only solution is radical cultivation, his double digging technique. This involves removing the top layer of the soil very carefully in systematic strips, and then loosening the subsoil with a fork, and then carefully and systematically restoring the topsoil one strip at a time, very gently. The layers of the soil are not mixed together, and the effect is to aerate the soil to depth. The method is to physically renovate the strata of the soil, such as happens in a landslide. It is like a slow-motion landslide. It is hard work. In Chadwick's method, he does it before every crop. The soil is loosened and aerated to a depth of some 40 or more inches. The psychological analogy for such a method is this. We remove or distract or displace the top layer, the conscious mind, and loosen, work, bring air and light into the deeper layers, the subconscious mind. Notice that in Chadwick's method, the topsoil is disturbed as little as possible, in small strips, and is restored as it was, or better. So it's not analogous to, say, LSD or narcotics, which set the conscious mind aside and go deep into the unconscious content, but do not necessarily leave the conscious layer intact. By this analogy, such things tend to scramble the layers together, like running a rotary hoe through the soil and mincing it. Or you could remove the topsoil entirely with a backhoe and blast the subsoil with a jackhammer. There are many reckless spiritual and psychological practices like that. Instead, what we want by this analogy is a method that gently folds back the conscious mind, as it were, without scrambling it, and that leaves it cogent and wholesome and intact. A method that at the same time penetrates deep below the surface and renovates the mind at depth. The conscious mind is hardly disturbed by the process. But it's hard work, as I say. You have to put your back into it, this tending of the ploughland.